In the quiet, terraced houses of the Black Country, a mother's prayer was a fragile thing. A whisper in the dark for a son far away, a hope folded into a letter, a desperate plea sent with every shell she packed. This isn't a story of generals or grand strategies. It's the story of a war fought on two fronts, separated by a channel of water but connected by blood and love. One front was in the mud-drenched trenches of France. The other was in the fiery, deafening heart of Britain's factories, where women waged a war of their own. They told us we were building for victory. Every shell I packed, I prayed it would keep my boy safe. But with every one I sent, a piece of my heart went with it, into the mud and the trenches. You see, while my son learned to kill, I learned to build the tools for it. And I've never been able to decide whose job was worse. Before the posters screamed for recruits, before the world went mad, life in the Black Country had its own rhythm. It was a rhythm of coal and iron, of hard work and simple faith. My son, Arthur, was just a boy, really. 19. His hands were more used to holding a football than a rifle. He had a laugh that could fill a room and a future that seemed as solid as the ground beneath our feet. We weren't wealthy, but we had each other. And that was enough. Then the Archduke was shot, and the world caught fire. The patriotism was a fever. It swept through our streets, our pubs, our homes. Young men like Arthur, full of imagined glory and a sense of duty, were the first to be consumed. I remember the day he enlisted. The pride in his eyes fought with fear in mine. He promised he'd be home by Christmas. They all did. I stood on the platform and waved until the train was a ghost of smoke on the horizon, feeling the first, chilling emptiness of a home that had lost its heart. As the ships carried our sons away, a new call echoed through the soot-stained towns. A call for us, the mothers, wives, and sisters. The war needed more than soldiers. It needed weapons. It needed an endless river of steel and explosives, and there weren't enough men left to forge it. So we answered. We traded our aprons for overalls, our kitchens for the deafening roar of the factory floor. I walked into the local munitions works not just for king or country, but because I had to believe that the work of my hands could somehow, some way, protect my son. The factory was a beast of brick and steam. The noise was a physical blow, a constant clang and hiss that vibrated through your bones until you couldn't remember what silence felt like. This was our new reality. As the war raged on, nearly 1 million women like me became munitionettes, the backbone of Britain's war machine. By 1917, a staggering 80% of all weapons and shells used by the British Army were being produced by us. They called us the Canaries. It sounds almost cheerful, doesn't it? But it was a name born of poison. We worked with trinitrotoluene TNT at toxic sulfur-colored dust that got into everything. It stained our skin, our hair, and our clothes a sickly, permanent yellow. We'd walk the streets and people would know exactly what we did, marked by our work. But the color was just the start. The headaches were constant. The nausea, a daily companion. We were handling poison, often with little more than cloth caps and a desperate hope for protection. Across Britain, around 400 women just like me died from overexposure to these chemicals during the war. The rules were absolute. To prevent a single spark, we wore special wooden clogs. No metal was allowed. No hairpins, no jewelry, not even a metal button. If you were caught with a match, you were fired on the spot. The fear of an explosion was a silent, suffocating presence. We had all heard the stories, whispers of factories vanishing in a flash of light. In one such disaster at Silvertown, 73 people were killed, and hundreds more were injured when 50 tons of TNT went up. We worked under the constant threat of a death as sudden and violent as any on the battlefield. And the work never, ever stopped. The shifts were brutal, 12 hours long, day and night. Life became a blur of work and sleep. There was no time for leisure, no energy for anything but collapsing into bed, your body aching, your skin yellow, and your mind filled with the dual terror of a factory explosion and a dreaded telegram from the War Office. While I learned the cold, precise geometry of a shell casing, Arthur was learning the geography of hell. His letters started with bravado tales of camaraderie and the strange adventure of it all. But a mother learns to read between the lines. I could feel the creeping horror in the spaces between his words. He wrote about the mud, a thick, greedy monster that swallowed men, horses, and hope. He wrote about the rats, bloated and fearless, feasting on the endless buffet of the fallen. And he wrote about the shelling, the constant, mind-shattering scream of incoming artillery, the earth-shaking explosions that turned the landscape into a pockmarked alien moon. In one letter, he told me about finding a piece of shrapnel from a British shell. It had the mark of a Midlands factory stamped on it. He tried to make a joke of it, wondering if I had packed it myself. I didn't laugh when I read it. The next day at the factory, my hands trembled as I filled the shells. I was sending these things, these instruments of death, into my own son's world. Was I building his shield or digging his grave? The thought was a torment that never left me. I'd pray over them, whispering his name, a foolish, desperate ritual in the heart of the machine. Our lives ran in a grim parallel. His days were measured in attacks and stand-downs, mine in production quotas and shift changes. His enemy was in the trench opposite. Mine was the TNT that poisoned my lungs, the crushing exhaustion, and the ever-present fear. I would stand in line for rations, my yellow hands clutching the coupons, and think of him, wondering if he was hungry, if he was cold. I'd hear a knock on the door, and my heart would stop every single time, convinced it was the boy with the telegram that began with the words, "We regret to inform you." He fought to survive the shells I was making. I fought to survive the making of them. In the factory, we were united by this shared dread. We were an army of women, our faces etched with worry. We talked about our boys, showed each other their pictures, read their letters aloud. We wept together when one of us got that dreaded telegram, and we worked harder the next day, fueled by a desperate, illogical belief that if we just made more, if we just worked faster, it would all be over sooner. The men who had at first resented us in the factories slowly fell silent. They saw the toll it was taking. They saw us shrinking, our faces becoming gaunt, but our resolve hardening into steel. We were fighting a war, too. There were no medals for us, no parades. Our battlefield was hidden behind factory walls, our sacrifices silent and unseen by the world. One Tuesday, the beast in the factory showed its teeth. It started with a low rumble, a vibration in the floor that was wrong. Then came the flash, a silent, blinding white light that seemed to swallow the world. The sound came a split second later, a physical force that threw me off my feet and slammed me into a wall. The air filled with dust, screams, and the horrifying smell of burning chemicals. I remember scrambling to my feet, the world a chaotic mess of twisted metal and injured women. The roof had collapsed in one of the filling sheds. For a moment, I was certain I was in one of Arthur's battles. The noise, the confusion, the sight of the injure. It was the war, come home. I survived, but many didn't. We stood outside, shivering in the aftermath, staring at the smoking ruin where we'd been working just moments before. The line between the home front and the battlefront had never felt so thin. Weeks later, a letter arrived from Arthur. It was smudged and torn. He had been in the Great Offensive. He described going over the top, the whistle blowing, the mad scramble across no man's land. He spoke of things a mother should never have to read, but he was alive. He had survived. As I stood there, my own body still bruised from the factory explosion, I realized the truth. We were both just survivors, caught in different parts of the same terrible, grinding machine. And then one day it was over. The factory whistle blew at an odd hour. A foreman stood on a crate and announced the armistice had been signed. A stranger, uncertain silence fell over the factory floor. The great beast of production slowly ground to a halt. There was no cheering, not at first, just a collective, exhausted sigh. We looked at each other, our yellow-stained faces streaked with tears. We had won, but what had we lost? The weeks that followed were a new kind of agony, the waiting, the not knowing. Then, finally, a letter. I'm coming home. The man who stepped off the train wasn't the boy who had left. He was thinner, and his eyes were older. They held a haunted look I had never seen before. He walked with a slight limp he never mentioned, and at night, I would hear him cry out in his sleep. He had come home, but a part of him was still buried in the fields of France. I looked at my own hands, the skin still tinged with yellow, the nails permanently damaged. I, too, was a veteran of this war. When the call came for the women to leave the factories to make way for the returning men, we went. We traded our overalls back for aprons and returned to the quiet rhythm of domestic life. But the silence was different now. It was filled with ghosts. The world remembers the soldiers, and so it should. It remembers the poets and the politicians, but it has a habit of forgetting the women with yellow hands and aching backs who built the arsenal of victory while their hearts were breaking. They were the invisible army, the munitionettes, the canaries who sang their song in the belly of the beast. This isn't just the story of a generation of men who went to fight. It's also the story of the women who were sent to the factories. It's the story of a mother who packed bombs while her son dodged them. A story of two fronts, two battles, and one shared, immeasurable sacrifice that bound a family together, even as the world tried to tear it apart. A sacrifice hidden in plain sight, just like the faint yellow stain that never quite washed away. The history books are full of well-known battles and famous men, but countless other stories have been left in the margins. If you want to help uncover more of these forgotten histories, the hidden battles and the unsung heroes, consider subscribing and joining our search for the truth.